So, acetate, Lily. I mean, to me, I think of acetate, I think of clear see-through, but I mean, there's stained glass windows that are acetate. So, tell us just a little bit about acetate.
Well, there are lots of different forms of acetate that we work with in our crafty stash. The main ones are probably going to be, first of all, our heat-resistant acetate. Now, a lot of them will look similar. The main differentiating factor in the way they look and feel is the strength and the thickness. Now, with your heat-resistant acetate, as the name suggests, this is heat-resistant, which means you can use it with things like your foiling systems, like your foil press, or you can be using it alongside your heat embossing. So if you're using your watermark ink pads alongside some of your embossing powders, that's how you can be using your heat-resistant acetate. And what it'll make sure is when you add that heat, by use of your heat tool, it's not going to shrivel and wrinkle. It'll still stay in perfect condition. So that's our heat resistant acetate. We also have our heavyweight acetate. Now, our heavyweight acetate is fantastic because it allows us to do lots of different construction projects with our heavyweight acetate. So by comparing both of them next to each other, you can see your heat resistant in this case is a little bit thinner, whereas your heavyweight acetate is a lot stronger. It's going to hold its shape, so it's going to be great for lots of different construction projects. You can be using it for creating your apertures in your card bases and popping this behind to give it strength. You can be using it to actually score and construct. So for example, you can create your boxes from this sort of acetate, and it's really great all-round acetate that's nice and strong, but you wouldn't be using this one with your heat-based medium. This is more for your heavyweight applications. Then alongside these two sort of main uses of acetate, we also have a printable acetate. So if you've got a printer that can actually print onto acetate and you're using something like our digital download papers, you can actually print out onto your acetate and that ink will dry onto the acetate without smudging. Then we also have things like our specialist acetates, like you've just seen with our fantastic stained glass window effect acetate. We also have foiled and printed acetate. So lots and lots of different ideas you can do with your acetate. But I have already talked about your heat embossing, but something else you can do with your acetate is you can actually do your embossing using your embossing folders. So I've got some of our heavyweight acetate, and I know I've still got the protective film on this. There's a protective film just on one side of our heavyweight acetate. So just find which side that film is on and just gently peel that back, and that reveals that lovely clear glossy acetate without the film on. Then I've got a 3D embossing folder here. This is just one of our lovely carved wood embossing folders, nice and detailed with being a 3D embossing folder. I'm going to place our acetate inside just like we would with if we're embossing paper or cardstock. We'll pop our cutting plate down first, and with it being a 3D embossing folder, we'll then add our magnetic shim, and finally we'll pop our plastic shim over the top, and then we can just run that through our embossing machine like our Gemini 2. So it's exactly the same plate combination as if you were using paper or cardstock, just we're using our acetate instead, which is going to give us a totally different look and feel as opposed to using something like your cardstock. So we take our design out of our embossing folder. You can see there you get that beautiful embossed design. You can see if we just tilt that on your emboss there, you get an incredible deep emboss, and it's just as gorgeous on the deboss as well as the emboss. Now that's a 3D embossing folder, but you can do exactly the same using your 2D embossing folder. So just using a slightly different embossing folder here onto your acetate. Once again, just change that plate combination so it's your 2 cutting plates with it being a 2D embossing folder. But how cool is that? That's just one of the super cool ways you can use your acetate in your crafting to actually emboss using your embossing folders.
Julie Palmer on YouTube, can you tell me the plate combination for cutting acetate, please?
Julie, that is an absolutely fantastic question. It's a question we get time and time again. Now, acetate is a little bit tricky, and it's not tricky in the fact that it's a thick medium. It's tricky because cardstock is basically ideal for die cutting. The way that a die works, when it cuts a cardstock, what happens is it actually separates the fibres of that cardstock. Now, with acetate effectively being a plastic, there's no fibres within there for it actually to separate. So it can be a little bit tricky in terms of getting it to cut. I wouldn't recommend a super detailed die. You will struggle cutting a super detailed die using acetate. However, if you've got things like nesting dies, basic shape dies, then it should still cut an absolute dream. Now, I'd start off with your sort of typical plate combination for a standard die. So I'd start off with your cutting plate there. If you imagine this is our cardstock with our die, we'd pop that into there, and then you'd go in with your other plates, which is your frosted shim, your magnetic, and your cutting plate. Now, you may find that because of the nature of acetate, that won't actually cut through. And what some people will do at this point is they'll just mix it up a little bit. So where you've got your die, so imagine your die is facing into your acetate there, they'd pop their magnetic shim onto that surface. Now, my top tip when it comes to cutting acetate, I actually pop between the die and the acetate, I'll pop a piece of copy paper, not cardstock, just nice thin copy paper, and that should help the acetate to cut. So either go in with your metal shim just next to the die, so you're cutting into the metal, so metal on metal, or add a piece of copier paper next to the dye and the acetate, and that will, because the fibres within that paper, it will help it to cut a little bit more. So hopefully that helps.
Absolutely. I do not help it. A lot of people are loving that embossing that you've just done with the acetate. Laurie on YouTube, I love this technique. I love the way it looks. And Diane on Facebook, that looks awesome. So a question from Sandra. I have a problem cutting my acetate. Any tips, please? Thanks. So just any general, I mean, that one, the paper may help. Any other ones that you may have?
So I'm wondering if you're referring to die cutting, hopefully those tips will have helped you. In terms of your guillotine or your trimmer, you need to make sure you've got a lovely sharp blade onto your guillotine or your trimmer. If you find your blade is a little bit dull, as can happen over time, just get yourself a piece of aluminium foil and just give that a few cuts using your trimmer or guillotine, and that will help sharpen the blade. A top tip as well when it comes to cutting anything using your guillotine, you've got on our guillotine at the side there, you've got that metal bar. What you want to be doing, instead of sort of cutting straight down, when you pull that lever down, you want to try and angle it and cut slightly inwards as well. And what that will mean is that you've got that metal on metal contact every single time you're using your trimmer, which will make sure that you're self-sharpening that blade every time. So hopefully that helps. If you're using scissors, nice sharp pair of scissors. If you're using a trimmer or a guillotine, make sure it's lovely and sharp, and it should still cut an absolute dream. Amazing.
Em's books are everywhere on YouTube. Do you take the protective film off the acetate before cutting?
That's a good question. Everyone does it slightly differently. I find personally, I tend to take the protective film off first, because that way then I know that it's a little bit thicker. There's a little bit less of a challenge for that trimmer or that die or whatever it might be to cut through. So I tend to remove it first. I'd say if you're die cutting, I would definitely remove that protective film. But otherwise, if you're just using your paper trimmer or guillotine, it is pretty much personal preference. But my preference is to remove that film first.
Perfect. Trudy on YouTube, what media is not recommended for acetate?
Oh, that's a very good question. So the thing about acetate is a non-porous medium. So when we talk about a porous medium, we're thinking of like a cardstock, something that will take and drink the ink. Whereas with the acetate, it is a non-porous medium. So in terms of if you want to be adding colour to your acetate, you've got to be a little bit more careful in terms of what you can add to the acetate, and it will actually dry on the surface. So for example, any sort of water-based medium, it will struggle to dry onto your acetate. So something like a aqua marker is never going to dry on acetate. It's just going to wipe off no matter how long you leave it to dry. So if you want to add colour onto your acetate, I would be using something like an alcohol marker. These are permanent markers that will go onto lots and lots of different surfaces, including acetate. So grab yourself something like your Classiques, it could be your Tri-Blends, it could be your Illustrators. Any of those permanent marker style pens will go onto acetate. Same sort of idea with our metallic paint markers. Those are multi-surface, so they will also go onto your acetate. So anything that's water-based is a bit of a no-go, but anything that's permanent like alcohol markers is good to go in terms of acetate, and you can create lots of amazing effects when you start to colour your own acetate.
Absolutely. The wonderful Nadia asks, what is the best ink to stamp onto acetate so it doesn't smudge?
That's a very good question. Now, in our Spectrum Noir range here at Crafter's Companion, we don't have a specific ink pad that will actually dry onto acetate. Unfortunately, all of them will rub off. If you've got yourself a StazOn in your crafty stash, another brand of ink pad, that's been designed to use on your non-porous surfaces as well, so that will work. However, if you are using our ink pads that we've got in our range here at Crafter's Companion, what I'd say is I'd get yourself a piece of your heat resistant acetate. I'd be using either my watermarked translucent ink pad, or I'd be using one of my pigment ink pads, and then I'd be setting it by adding some of your embossing powder, clear or coloured, over the top there, and that will give you that lovely stamp and emboss. So in terms of our ink pads, you're going to have to emboss it, or if you've got a StazOn in your crafty stash, then that will work a treat as well.
Absolutely. I'd love to create on YouTube. Which from the acetate is printable? So will it go into a laser printer is the question.
So nice and easy question. I don't know if we've got this in stock at the moment, but the printable acetate is the one that's called printable acetate. So as simple as that, we've got our heavyweight that's literally just called heavyweight acetate. Could not be simpler. We have got our fantastic heat resistant, it's also called heat resistant, and then our printable acetate. So it will, any acetate, whether it's our brand or another brand, if it's printable, it should say in the name, it'll be called your printable acetate.
Thank you very much. I didn't realise that. I was just thinking of back in school in the UK, you have assemblies where you were singing.
Yes.
And you'd have the overhead projector, and you'd have the acetate on the with all the song lyrics,
yes.
and you'd have to move the. I was the OHP monitor,
Ooh.
and you'd move the song lyrics up and down so people could read all the lyrics while they were singing along.
Wow!
We knew how to live. The wonderful Justice Lee on YouTube, Canned Beans. Can heat-resistant acetate be used for the foil press or only heat embossing?
Anything that's hot, anything that's heated, you should be all right with using that. So if you want to use it on your foil press, that's absolutely fine. You can be using it with your heat tools, you can be using it on your foil press or any sort of heated system. It will work an absolute treat.
Perfect. Genesis on YouTube, like vellum, I am clueless when it comes to what type of adhesive to use in acetate. What would you recommend? And then she's put 6 question marks.
6 question marks, right. Well, super simple with this one. So when it comes to acetate, I class it as a little bit of more of a tricky medium to stick. So something like your all-purpose is a bit of a no-go zone. I would be going for either your tacky glue, that will work nicely, but just bear in mind a wet glue like this basically dries by soaking into the fibres of the cardstock, and because acetate, as we know, doesn't have any fibres, it will take quite a long time to dry if you're using your tacky glue. So for me, my go-to is either my tape pen. Your tape pen is a super strong adhesive, so that's still going to stick your acetate, or my number one go-to for acetate is always your red liner tape. Red liner tape is super, super strong, whether you're using the 3mm, the 6mm or the 12mm, you're going to get a beautiful bond onto your acetate, and it's pretty clear as well. So even if you don't manage to hide that adhesive onto your acetate, it is pretty clear, so you tend not to be able to see it too much.
Perfect. Robin on Facebook, best way to remove the film? Take the DVD out. Sorry.
Good question. So for me, the way that I always find easier, and it doesn't matter how long I've been using acetate, and I use acetate literally day in, day out, I love using acetate. I always find it difficult to know which side of the actual acetate the film is on. So what I tend to do is I'll just get the very, very corner of my acetate, and what I'll do is I'll grab a poker tool and I'll just give it a little scratch, and as soon as you start giving it a scratch, if that's the side the film is on, you'll notice it'll start to bubble up and start to come away a little bit. If none of that happens and I just end up scratching the acetate, then I'll turn it over, I'll do exactly the same on the other side, I'll give it a little scratch, and then when you start to get a little bit that's coming away, and then I'll just all peel it back. So it's just a case of the most difficult part is getting that initial sort of lifting up of the film. I find your poker tool is the best way. You just want to sort of scratch it and it'll be lift off, and then it's very easy to peel it off once you've got that corner lifted up.
Amazing. Laurie on YouTube, I only purchase heat resistant because I never know what I'm going to do with it. Any ideas?
Do you know what? That is a super, super good idea. I know a lot of people do the similar sort of thing. They only buy heat resistant, so then they know for certain that if they're going to peel acetate, then it's definitely going to be heat resistant. Now, it's a fantastic acetate. You can still emboss it. You can still use it for your shaker cards, but of course you can use your heat embossing on it. So any stamp that you've got, as long as you've got either any colour of pigment ink pad or a watermark ink pad like the one that we've got here, and some sort of embossing powder, you can stamp onto it, you can heat emboss, and it's going to create the most incredible embellishments. For example, if you've got something like your flower stamps, you can actually stamp onto your acetate, heat emboss using your embossing powders, and use them as lovely floral translucent embellishments. It's an incredible medium to heat emboss, just gives you a little bit of a different look and feel, but heat resistant acetate is a great one to have in your crafty stash.
Robin's asking 2 questions from Robin. So number 1, if you're making a shaker, what's best? Front and then back using acetate, or front acetate then back card?
You've obviously always got to have your acetate at the front because that's the window part. Some people will choose to have your acetate behind, so then they can create almost like a separate shaker before they stick it onto their cards, whereas some people will create the shaker, pop the shaker beads or glitter or whatever they're using onto the card, and then pop their shaker over the top. The reason why some people don't like that as much is because then it's a little bit more difficult to gauge exactly where you want to add the glitter. So what some people will do is they'll create their shaker, you've got your front of your shaker there with your foam all around the edge, and then they'll enclose it with the acetate onto the reversed, and then that will give you that almost like a self-contained shaker as a topper that they can use onto their card. But it's completely up to you. No one is better than the other. It's all whatever you find easiest in terms of how you construct your shakers and how you're constructing your cards.
Great. And one other question for Robin. We've answered half of this question. Can you emboss acetate? Yes. And colour it? You can colour it easily.
Absolutely.
Inside, you?
Yeah, if you've got something like an alcohol marker, or if you've got some of our metallic paint markers, that is going to look absolutely amazing. Adding some gold to that or silver can absolutely, as long as it's not a water-based medium, so as long as it's an alcohol pen, you'll be absolutely fine. That's going to look amazing coloured, that one.
Right, last couple of questions because we're running rapidly out of time. Suzanne asked on YouTube, can you emboss your acetate and use it for a shaker card?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Churchill. Oh, yes.
I got very excited. I was like, what a fantastic idea. I got very excited. I suddenly became Churchill.
When Lily becomes excited, she says a Churchill the dog.
I do.
Tracy on YouTube, would die cutting cause the acetate to crackle, please, Lily?
It will make, as it goes through the die cutting machine, it will make quite a alarming noise. It sounds a little bit like... a
lobster.
Not quite like a lobster. It's almost like if you like walking on sugar. It's like a crackly sort of noise. That's the tone.
How many times you walk on sugar?
All the time.
Are you a candy floss dealer?
No. So it will make that sort of noise as it goes through the die cutting machine. It's just as the acetate is being cut, basically. That's a totally normal noise for it to make. It does sound quite alarming, more so than paper's being cut, but that's actually a great sign because it actually means that acetate is being cut. So yes, it will make a crackly noise as it goes through the die cutting machine, but as long as you've got a crisp, clean cut, the acetate itself shouldn't crack in terms of its appearance.
Walking on sugar. So, last couple of questions. Robin on Facebook, does the lightweight acetate have a protective film on?
Well, after my faux pas earlier, I'm probably not the best person to ask, but I don't think it does. I've got a piece here that I've not peeled anything back from. And if I'm doing my little scratch test that I've just been telling you guys about, I'm scratching on that side and I'm not feeling anything coming away. So if I try it again on the other side, I'm scratching again and there's nothing coming away. So I'm pretty sure on your heat resistant, if I'm wrong, somebody at home, please let me know. But I do believe there is no film on your heat resistant.
Right, that's 2 questions. Tracy on YouTube, does adding copier paper prevent the old cutting lines appear on the finished acetate, please?
I'm not quite sure what you mean.
So I think in the plates, sometimes the plates have got old cutting lines on the plates. Does that protected paper stop it?
So if your paper is between, like I've said, if your paper is between your dye and your acetate will still be next to the plate, so no. But it shouldn't mark too much with acetate because acetate is such a thick medium. You should find, because I tend to find personally my cutting plates will mark more onto thinner mediums, you should find that you shouldn't get too much marking from your plates.
And last question from her wonderful Hadassah. I've never tried, but wondering if you can use the glitter paste on acetate. If so, what type of acetate?
Absolutely, you certainly can. It's a technique that I love, 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 love. Totally up to you what acetate you use. It will work on literally any of them. But if you're thinking that you want the acetate to be a little bit stronger, perhaps it's going to be in an aperture, perhaps you're even going to glitter paste your acetate, you're going to make a box lid out of it. How cool would that be? If you want to be doing construction, things like that, then I'd say go for your heavyweight acetate. But any of the acetates, whether it's printable, whether it's heat resistant, whether it's any of them in your crafty stash, all those will take your glitter paste. And believe you me, Hadassah, it looks absolutely amazing.
Hope that helped you with your acetate questions. Remember, you can save this into your playlist and you can come back and watch this as many times as you wish if you've got any questions about acetate. Thank you very much, Lee.